Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Women in Conflict and Violence and Power, a debate hosted by the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, UN Women, and the Denis Mukwege Foundation. My name is Stephanie Filion, and I'm going to be your host today. I'm a United Nations correspondent. We're live from New York City. We're only a few blocks away from the United Nations headquarters where the UN General Assembly is taking place. At this very moment, world leaders are setting the foreign affairs agenda for the year to come. But we're going to step away for 90 minutes to zoom in on one issue that affects at least 50% of the population, but that really impacts all of us: women, peace, and security. For the next hour, you're going to hear from inspiring women, from world leaders, from activists and survivors. They're going to share their stories with us, and they are going to tell us how we can help them. Welcome to our live program. That affects at least 50% of the population, but that really impacts all of us. For the next hour, you're going to hear from Wherever you're watching us, we want to hear from you. You can comment on social media with the hashtag WomenInConflicts, UNGA. So first of all, President Charles Michel, thank you so much for being with us. Merci d'être avec nous.
No, thank you. Thank you for all the participants. We are convinced during this General Assembly of the United Nations that it's paramount to defend our fundamental principles, our fundamental values. And we know that violence against women in conflicts is another form of pandemic, and that's why we need to stand together to be very firm in order to fight against this violence against women in conflict. A few months ago, I had the opportunity to meet Nadia Murad in Paris. And she shared with us her testimony, her personal experience. And I was very impressed, I was very touched. And it's one of the reasons for this initiative. The last weeks, the world is facing a new situation in Afghanistan. This is another reason for concern. And that's why today, I hope with the representatives of the UN, I hope with the political actors, and I hope with the personalities, with the personal experience, we can express a very strong message.
And that's exactly why we're glad to be joined by Nadia Murad today, Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Nadia Murad is herself a survivor. She was kidnapped by ISIS and kept for 3 months. She's lost family members at the end of the terrorist group, including her own mother. Nadia Murad has worked tirelessly to advocate for Yazidi in Iraq, and she's a UN Women Goodwill Ambassador. Nadia Murad is joining us from Washington. Thank you so much for being with us. So Nadia, we're talking to you on the margin of the UN General Assembly. Leaders are going to make promises, commitments. What are you hoping to hear about when it comes to women in conflicts?
First of all, thank you. I would like to thank President Michel for inviting me here today and for being an outspoken ally for the causes of gender equality. I am honored to join activists and world leaders in this decision. My hope for the General Assembly this year is for world leaders to come to a common understanding of the horrible impact of conflict on women's rights. Beyond recognition, the General Assembly must unite to take meaningful action to end the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war. Today, We see the price of conflict exacted on women's bodies in Iraq, Afghanistan, Tigray, and so many other places. Yet, sexual violence has not been banned as a tactic of warfare in international law. Sexual violence must not be tolerated in times of conflict or peace. I have spoken to so many world leaders who share my outrage at this horrible violation of human rights. To them, I say it is not enough to condemn sexual violence when it occurs. Such statements do nothing to help survivors or the next generation of women and girls who will suffer. We must actively work to prevent sexual violence before it happens. This means operating on the assumption that women will be targeted during conflict. We cannot give armed actors and terrorist groups the benefit of the doubt when it comes to women's rights. Instead, the international community should create a clear plan for preventing sexual violence in all cases of conflict. I know that this will be challenging. As we speak, nearly 2,800 Yazidi women and children are living in sexual slavery. Despite appeals from Yazidi community, including survivors, there have been no coordinated search for and rescue efforts for those survivors, for victims, Yazidi and women and children who are still in ISIS captivity. If the international community cannot collaborate on a goal as clear defined as rescuing Yazidi women and children from captivity, how will it ever address the wider scope of conflict-related sexual violence? For me, hope lies in the title of this session. Women lead the way. To sustainably protect women's rights in conflict, we have to look beyond war and rethink peace building and development as well. Waging war is simple compared to reconciliation, reconstruction, and prevention. If we want communities to recover from and prevent conflict, we should invest in women. So much potential is lost when we ignore the power of women to rebuild their communities, enact restorative justice, and create safer, more prosperous societies. It is crucial that the perspectives of women and survivors are reflected in decision-making at every level. I implore you to champion their visions of a more peaceful world by listening, investing, and giving women more seats at the table.
Nadia, Murad, so you're known for your work for women in Iraq, but women's rights are universal, and I'm sure you're watching the situation in Afghanistan. What message would you like to send to women in Afghanistan?
My message is twofold. First of all, I want Afghan women to know that we see the gains they fought so hard for over the last 20 years. Although it may feel like all is lost, their accomplishments in education, art, employment, and governance cannot be denied. Freedoms may be restricted at the moment, but we still believe in the power of Afghan women to lead their country into a peaceful, prosperous, and equitable future. Secondly, I want Afghan women to know that this burden is not theirs to bear alone. The international community failed them and must do more to provide the resources needed for women to access food, healthcare, and education. World leaders must do more to support the dignity and rights of the displaced and prevent violence against women. People all around the world are working to hold leaders accountable for their responsibility to protect the rights of women, and we will not look away. My message to leaders convening at the General Assembly is that the world is at a difficult crossroads. We are living through a global pandemic, the highest levels of displacement ever recorded, a climate crisis, and growing inequality. Empty promises and sympathy will resolve nothing. These challenges require collaboration on concrete plans of action. We have a moral responsibility to face these challenges head on instead of passing them on to the future generation.
Nadia, Murad, thank you so much to have taken the time this time with us. And if you could stick around for maybe a minute, because I'm sure that President Michel would love to react to what you said, and especially when she says, you know, it's easy to wage war, but it's harder to build peace. So what are your reactions to something like that?
I totally agree that if we want peace, we need to be courageous. And I totally agree that we need not only to speak, we need not only to be vocal, what we are doing today, but we need to act. And that's why I like this idea of an international plan in order to identify what are the concrete measures that we can take together in order to prevent, of course, in order to guarantee the fundamental rights of women, of girls, but also in order to make sure that we fight against impunity, which is also, I think, an important priority.
And for the first part of the show, we're going to stick to the topic of Afghanistan, and we're going to start with a video provided by our partners, UN Women. live from New York City. This is Women in Conflicts, and joining us in studio is Estonia's President, Kersti Kaljulaid. President Kaljulaid, thank you so much for being with us.
It's an honor.
We are going to go to Doha, Qatar right now to talk to Fawzia Koofi. Fawzia Koofi was the first woman to ever be named Deputy Speaker of Parliament in Afghanistan. She was also one of 4 women involved in the intra-Afghan peace talk that took place also in Doha, Qatar. Thank you so much for being with us, Fawzia.
Thank you, Stephanie, for having me.
So we just watched this timeline provided by UN Women. The video really speaks for itself for what's at stake right now for Afghan women. How did you feel watching the video?
It's disappointing to see each time we go back to scratch and we have to start. First of all, I thank the EU and the UN Women and Dr. Denis Foundation for giving me this opportunity to share the story of the woman in Afghanistan. As they say, the women of Afghanistan are the most talked about, but the least listened to. But at least I have this opportunity to share my experience and the story of millions and thousands of Afghan women and girls and men also from my country. It's a story of a stranger that has walked for days and days in the search of water and is extremely thirsty. And the moment she gets to the water, she sees that there is no water and she faces a big mountain. That is our struggle. That is our story. When I left Kabul a few days ago, the city looked like a graveyard of people who were alive but could not breathe. Over the past few weeks, perhaps most of you have not heard about the war in Afghanistan. Our war has not made the headlines. But the image probably from Afghanistan would be that it's a country in peace. How can a country be in peace if more than half of its population starts their day with anxiety of how to end it? In my country, the days are way longer than your countries for its people and especially for women and girls. Some of women in Afghanistan, only a few weeks ago, they were the part of progress of their nation and their country. Now they tell me that their main job during a day is counting the wall of their homes as they have nothing else to do and they're obliged to stay home. Only woman or any human who is in that situation will feel the pain of those moments. Why should only women carry the burden? If it's war, they lose their loved ones, the breadwinners of their families, the brothers, the husbands. If it's in peace, they lose the opportunity. The opportunities are being taken away from them. We all have seen the images of whipping, of beating of women in Afghanistan. Not only women, the journalists, those people that have demanded basics. They have done their job to ask for a life of dignity. With an oppressed civil society, with a silenced media, these abuses will never stop. The future of Afghanistan is the latest test case for whether or not we can come together as a global community in the face of adversity. What's happening in Afghanistan should be a concern to all of us. We have to act together in providing those under threat a safe place. I therefore call on all of you to use your power back home to show solidarity with the people of Afghanistan. First and foremost, for the women of Afghanistan. At the same time, we have to come together to hold the Taliban accountable for what's happening in my country. There are serious reports that show that despite their publicly stated commitments, to the contrary, fundamental freedoms are being flouted. Those who have been publicly standing for their rights are facing reprisals. Women and girls are once again reluctant to second-class citizens. Literally, they're making us invisible, deprived from schoolwork or any political rule. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see after 20 years, we have to start from scratch. We have to talk about the same issues that we have been talking 20 years back. The international community has to make it clear that it will only work with authorities in Kabul if they map out a clear path that guarantees the basic fundamental rights of all segments of society, in particular, women and girls. They should also include a speedy return to the constitutional order through election in which every human being will have the right to take part in the future of their government. I stop here and I will be very open for the questions.
Mrs. Kufi, thank you so much, and do stay with us because we will have more questions. But I want to turn now to President Caroline. You were in Afghanistan not long ago. I think it's April, and I'm sure you've met some women there. What are your priorities right now when you're thinking about Afghan women?
Priorities have, of course, changed since April. In April, we were discussing about how to use technology to teach women to read, how to help web doctors to reach women who cannot be reached otherwise, how to train midwives, and how to make sure that all the trained midwives really get enough patients so that people will really take to the doctor. Now the priorities are totally different. The priority now is to protect and save the professional Afghan woman. It's really, I would say, a low ambition, but even that today, and this is not the first time today that I'm speaking about Afghanistan, even that seems relatively difficult to achieve. Estonia, together with Norway, we are penholders for Afghanistan file in the United Nations Security Council, and of course this is the table of the most difficult debates globally to be part of. We will strive, we will stand up for women's rights, for children's rights, but at the same time, when there is urgency, it's very difficult not to feel inadequate and not to feel that indeed we need to be patient and we need to be balanced and we need to offer some help unconditionally. But at the bottom of your own heart, it's breaking. And this is exactly how it is. What to do to protect the professional Afghan woman today? This is the biggest, most important, most urgent question.
Thank you so much. President Michel, concretely, what options are on the table now for the EU in order to put pressure on the Taliban to respect Afghan women?
Yeah. First of all, this is very clear for us at the EU level that we do not intend to rush into any international recognition of the Taliban regime. The first priority for us is to make sure that they will fulfill international obligations, that they will guarantee the fundamental basic human rights, especially the women's rights and the rights of women. We have an important tool. This is our humanitarian support, and we will be on the side of the Afghan people, the Afghan women, the Afghan girls, point one. Point two, we want to build an alliance with the international community in order to put political pressure. And we know that we will need to monitor the situation. We will need to be in close contact with the Afghan women. And you know that we call on an inclusive and representative government, because it is paramount in our opinion that women will be part of the government in Afghanistan. It's not the case now. The first announcements are not positive. It means that we need to exercise pressure in order to deliver.
Thank you, President Michel. You are going to be back with us later on in the program. And we are now going to zoom out from Afghanistan for a few minutes. We are going to watch a video provided by the Denis Mukwege Foundation.
I was raped when I was still young, in wartime in my country, and I wasn't allowed to say or to share anything to what happened to me. Because of shame of my family, and also since my rape, it was politically motivated because we were scared of stigma, and also we were scared that I may be killed if I say that I was raped by soldiers. So there was no room for justice. There was no room to say what happened during the war or what happened to me. So I was completely silenced. It's very important that we draw red line against rape or sexual violence in conflict and just fight impunity from our own government and allow survivors to be empowered so they can stand on the court of justice. Survivors need to be supported. There is a need also for international court to be given capacity to be able to work quickly, because when the case of survivor is there on the court for quite many years, survivors get affected emotionally and mentally. He end up in isolation. No one believes in him.
Don't forget that you can comment on social media with the hashtag Women in Conflicts UNGA. Joining us in studio now is Sherzad Kufi. You are Farziya's Kufi's daughter. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are going to be back with you in a moment, but I just wanted to have President Karyulait's reaction to the video we just watched about sexual violence in conflict. Estonia's been sitting on the Security Council for almost 2 years. You just talked about it recently. When it comes to women being used as a weapon of war, what more can be done by the United Nations and specifically by the Security Council to make sure that resolutions are being implemented?
First and foremost, I believe we can be proud that it is always an inherent part of a conflict resolution to pay attention to what is happening to the weaker in the society within conflict, women and children. This is already a big achievement, but behind this table, you cannot start or end a discussion about the conflict without taking care of the rights of women, taking care of the situation of women and children in that particular conflict. Also, if we read the report of children in conflict of the Secretary General, there are, of course, atrocities which are mentioned, taken up. And today, there is an added urgency in this, that it's pandemic time. We are not even able to go find and talk, but we have absolutely no reason to believe that things have gotten better. So the picture is mixed. Yes, we are more, involved. We do not talk about the conflict. First we resolve this, and only then we turn to the women's issues. This is positive side. But the negative side is always that, we are underachieving when the real results are discussed. But what we are doing, and which is, I think also, I believe it helps the women if they are now able to speak up here and give their testimony. It's also hard for them, but at the same time, finally, they are given justice in being heard. And thank you for giving this opportunity.
Thank you, President. I want to turn now to Sherzad. We're very lucky to have you today. Your mother was supposed to come, but she wasn't able to make it in the end. But thank you for being with us. You are in your early 20s, so you don't know what it's like to live in Afghanistan under Taliban rules. You left the country not long ago. What are you hearing from your friends that are still there? And are you hopeful about the future? Are you hoping to go back?
First of all, thank you so much for giving me this platform to not only represent myself, but also my generation back home and a lot of women. I want to become the voice for the voiceless. Everything happened all of a sudden. The fall of Kabul and our dreams being shattered with it was not expected, and it's very heartbreaking for us. I was evacuated to Doha, and I got lucky enough to come here to share my experience with you guys. I was born and raised in Afghanistan, so it is a very during the past 23 years, it has been infected by the war. So I could see the impacts that the war had in my country, but I also got educated. I got my education back home. I could practice, some of the basic human rights, which are now denied by the Taliban to the woman. The simple act of driving, it was not common back before the Taliban either, but now it's fully stopped. Like, I could practice those rights that I cannot now. So moving forward, I feel like if we ask about whether or not I am hopeful, we are hopeful as a generation, I would say yes. Are we capable? Yes. But is it enough? Because I know a lot of girls, a lot of boys, educated, capable, who are now forced to flee the country for their own safety, cannot do anything outside the country but to, search for opportunities to be able to go back and do something. I have studied in US, I have 2 degrees. I graduated with honors. I had the option of staying here and doing my job and take the easier route and settle here in US. But I chose to go back to Afghanistan because I run and direct a non-profit organization there. It's called Justice for Equality in Afghanistan, where I actually work toward women empowerment. My initial plan and goal was to help women become financially independent. So for that dream to remain a dream, it's very heartbreaking. And for me to not be able to work towards that dream because of the fact that Taliban now has the control. But I still believe that we are capable, and it's very important for the international community to give us the opportunity for us to be able to fight for our rights, fight for women's rights to education, to freedom of expression. And I also believe that we will get back up again. Like, that's the only thing I could do. We cannot afford not being hopeful. Like the phoenix from the ashes. Together we can do this. We can find a way out.
Thank you so much, Sherzad. And I want to go back to your mother in Doha. So, Mrs. Kufi, are you proud of your daughter? Do you have any reaction?
I'm proud of every woman and girl today in Afghanistan. Have you seen those images where women with open chest facing the Taliban gun? They know that at any moment they might be killed, but they still continue to have that civil disobedience, and they want to have a right with simple definition, a right with dignity and rights. I'm very proud of every woman and man who stood by women in Afghanistan in these difficult days. I'm hoping that I will be with them, hopefully very soon, to restore what we deserve in Afghanistan. Women of Afghanistan are the most passionate, resilient, hardworking, yet oppressed generation and citizens of the world. As I said before, we are a nation that we walk kilometers and miles to reach to the water, and the moment we are close to the water, we see there is no water. That is our story. That is the life we have had experience so far.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Kofi. Thank you so much, Sherzad, for being with us in studio, and President Kayulai, thank you so much. Now, from crises to solutions, we're going to look at what change it makes when women are given a seat at the negotiation table. Live from New York City, you are watching Women in Conflicts, a side event of the United Nations General Assembly. Joining now in studio is Ireland's Taoiseach, or Prime Minister, Micheál Martin. Thank you so much for being with me.
You're very welcome indeed. Delighted to be here.
We're going to go first to Fatima Muriel, who is joining us. She came all the way from Colombia. Fatima Muriel is the president of the Alianza de Organizaciones de Mujeres Tejedoras de Vida, excuse my pronunciation, in Colombia. And it's an organization that is fighting for women's and human rights in Colombia. Fatima is both a survivor and a change maker. She's lost family members at the hand of rebel group FARC and used that anger to fight for change. She was also a voice for women in the peace process in Colombia. Fatima, you traveled all the way from Putumayo, Colombia, a formerly FARC-held territory. What was it like for you to live through that conflict?
I want to thank the European Union for this experience, and to think about all the women that are in conflict today. And thankfully, we have an agreement, a peace agreement, and with that, we were able to establish peace in Colombia, and we were able to establish a peace observatory. We are a lot more active today, and we're fighting for the rights of women. We've received a lot of hope to keep fighting So that's why today we're here. We have been working. We feel that we are the mediators of peace. We work for the empowerment of women so that they have a say.
Taoiseach Martin, you come from Ireland, a country that has a unique history when it comes to women being involved in peacemaking, peace building. I'm sure your story relates to the one, your national history relates to the one of Fatima.
Absolutely, and mille gracias, Fatima. And indeed, the lessons from the conflict in Northern Ireland have been shared with Colombia, and one of our former Deputy Prime Ministers, Eamon Gilmore, has been a peace envoy for the European Union in Colombia. And we've endeavoured to share the lessons that we experienced about the role of women in ending conflict and also in the negotiations and in being part of the solution and part of the agreement. And the women had powerful voices in Ireland back in the 1970s and 80s when the conflict was in full rage. Women marched and women leaders said enough is enough of the violence, a bit like what Fatima has done in Colombia. And then after that, they were at the table and they were at the negotiating table. And it still continues. As Prime Minister, I continue a dialogue series on how we share our island together with the different traditions who were once in conflict. And part of that dialogue is to give a stronger voice again to women and to young people because it is their future. But we are in no doubt about the powerful influence that women can have on finding solutions to conflict situations and to challenges that arise. And we also need to learn more ourselves as we continue the journey of peace. It's not over. We need a lot of patience. And that is why we found the experience in Colombia very helpful too, because no one conflict is the same. And we find that sharing our experiences can help others and we can learn from each other.
Thank you. Fatima, I want to go back to you. So in your experience, what difference does it make when women have a seat at the negotiation table? Okay, so while we fix this technical problem, I'm going to go back to the Taoiseach. Taoiseach Martin, Ireland is currently sitting on the Security Council. It's actually president of the Security Council this month. And Ireland has made it a goal to bring up the topic of women and girls as often as it can. That being said, there are some countries that still doubt that this topic belongs to the Security Council. So how is Ireland fighting that?
Well, I think we've pushed ahead, and in fact, we have insisted at every council meeting during our presidency that women in conflict, their voice would be heard at the council. And so more women who have experienced conflict have made presentations to the Security Council than men. It's the golden thread throughout our presidency and our membership of the Security Council, women, peace and security. And we've already had some success in terms of bringing those voices to the council meetings themselves. We also co-chair with Mexico the informal expert group on women in conflict. So we're going to continue with that. It is our major goal and theme of our membership of the Security Council. along with climate, of course, but women in conflict is something during this month we have prioritized to great effect, and we have found people facilitative.
Perfect. And maybe one specific question about what you envision are the next steps when it comes to Afghanistan on the Security Council?
Well, I think the next steps have to be very strong unity among global nations in terms of leveraging with the Taliban regime an absolute commitment to preserving the advances that have been made in terms of education, in terms of basic human rights for women and girls in Afghanistan. I was very touched by the presentations earlier. There were powerful testimonies in terms of what has happened. We cannot let the progress of the last 20 years wither away. And there's a huge obligation on us, the international community, to really do everything we possibly can to protect women and girls in Afghanistan and to give them access to their basic entitlements, most of all in education. And we have seen the radical impact that education has had on the lives of women in Afghanistan. And that is something that personally I would be very committed to, working with our colleagues in the European Union and at the United Nations. Every tool we have at our disposal must be used with that sort of absolute, almost ruthless focus to protect women.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Martin. Now I'm going to go back to Fatima to ask you the same question. So what difference does it make when women have a seat on the negotiation table?
Well, everything changes when we sit in the table, we take decisions, we collaborate, and we're equal. We've had dialogues in Putuyama with actors. We've had meetings. And that's why we have been very successful in the work that we're doing. We've sat with the armed forces. We wanted to find the people that we're missing, and we have reached consensus and agreement with them. And we also understand the anger, because, for instance, a woman that was the mother of a paramilitary was also sad because her son was missing. So we were able to have effective dialogues with all of them, and also to get the acknowledgement and respect of the whole of the community. For us, the symbolic language have been very important. Women guardians of water who are doing so many activities today. And to put an end to violence, because conflict has just left behind a lot of pain. And so, with the support of the European Union, that has given us so much security so that we can continue doing all of these things in these very difficult moments, to be able to defend our land, to fight against narco traffickers. But we keep preparing ourselves, fighting. We have trained so many women on empowerment, on gender equality. We have the batucada of women, of girls, and we're getting ready so that they can take the baton and we can keep the fight. We've worked for 20 years. We've defended our lands. We have been able to overcome so many difficulties in spite of the threats. We fight, we're resilient, because we have a very good, allies behind us. And that's why we are working today. We're doing a lot of, we give psychological support to women, and that's why we call ourselves tejedoras de vidas, because we build a community. We have this peace observatory that helps all the NGOs, and we add more and more organizations, and we're creating these networks so that we can defend our land, so that we can overcome our difficulties. We empower women at all the spheres, the political sphere, the economical spheres, without risking anything, because that's why we're fighting for. We are protecting women. We know that out there are so many powerful people. We only have our voice, our work, our hope, and the love to fight for our land and our women.
Gracias, Fatima Muriel, and thank you, Taoiseach Martin, for being with us today. Now, from solutions to action. We're going to look at what the international community can do to help women. And we're going to start with a video from somebody that you should recognize. She's coming from a good place.
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, Nobel laureates, and women's rights champions. I am Kristen Bell, the global advocate for the United Nations Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. And it's my honor to join you on International Day of Peace. As you have heard from today's amazing speakers, women facing conflict are not passive victims. Working with the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, I've seen firsthand how women in conflict are engines of progress, resilience, and action. It is the women on the front lines who are leading local movements to prevent conflict, respond to crises, fight sexual and gender-based violence, and build long-lasting peace in their communities. We know that when women can fully participate in society, outcomes improve across the board for everyone. Economies grow, the reach of humanitarian aid expands, access to healthcare, education, and justice, it just thrives for everyone. So why is it that of the billions of dollars in aid that goes to countries facing crises, only 0.2% makes it into the hands of women and their organizations? That does not make any sense to me. It has been proven that local women's organizations deliver results. You can count on them. They work in remote areas, reach the most marginalized groups, build trust and lasting relationships in their communities. In the DRC, for example, our partners are training women's groups to monitor violence and threats against women in conflict. And with the support of the EU's Spotlight Initiative, these women are providing safe spaces for women survivors and opportunities to build economic recovery. In Haiti, WPHF is supporting women to lead local disaster response, protect displaced women against sexual exploitation and abuse. With the alarming situation in Afghanistan and the increased backlash we are seeing against women's rights worldwide, we must support women's organizations and women's human rights defenders now more than ever. Women and girls are half the population. They have the right to be included, for their voices and their expertise to shape local responses. Local women's orgs bring structural change to address the root causes of conflict and inequity on the ground. So imagine what would happen if the world stood behind them. That's why the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund is rallying the world to support local women's organizations and human rights defenders working in some of the toughest crises on the planet. Through our 1,000 Women Leaders campaign, WPHF is aiming to mobilize $112 million to support their work by the end of 2025. So I invite you and you and you and you in the back to join our campaign today. We must invest in the untapped potential of women on the front lines. Together, we can amplify their voices, highlight their impact, and support their mission to build a more peaceful world for all. Thank you.
Live from New York City, you are watching Women in Conflicts. Don't forget to share your comments with the hashtag Women in Conflicts, UNGA. Joining us in studio now, the Prime Minister of Sweden, Stefan Löfven. Thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
We also have with us in studio Louise Mouchikiwabo, the Secretary General of the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie. Merci d'être avec nous. And we're going to start with Dima Moussa. Dima, you're a member of the Syrian Constitutional Committee. The name says it. It's responsible for drafting a new constitution for Syria, but with a bigger goal of building lasting peace in the country. And as the Secretary General Antonio Guterres calls it, in a Syrian-owned and Syrian-led way. You're also a member of the opposition. So, Dima, the work of the committee could restart soon. What are your concerns and priorities?
First of all, thank you for bringing me here. As we see that we notice that the Syria file is losing some of its momentum and falling down on the priority list in the international community, which is of a great concern because this translates into more misery for the Syrian people and now a 10-year-old conflict. Our concern is that we've already had 5 rounds of the Constitutional Committee with 0 results, 0 product in terms of constitutional content, and this is a reflection of where we are in terms of this conflict, in terms of the political process, which is at a standstill. And it is also a reflection of the international community's involvement in the Syria file. We need a lot of interest, cooperation, consensus, working together at all levels, at the Syrian level, but also at the international community's level. And we haven't seen that take place yet. Without that, I don't think we can see any positive steps forward. And with the Constitutional Committee being the only part of the political process underway, we need more. Because if we go into another round and all the parties that are not interested in moving the process forward and continuing to be able to obstruct it, not being pushed to actually engage positively in it, we're not going to send any strong messages or positive messages to the Syrian people that there is actually going to be peace anytime soon.
Thank you so much. So we're going to go to Prime Minister Le Pen. Sweden was the first country to create a feminist foreign policy. You are probably watching the Syrian file very closely. So what is Sweden doing to support Syrian women, and what did it do in the past with its feminist foreign policy?
First, I think we need to make very clear that there's not a country, there's not a world that can fully use its potential unless men and women have the same rights. I think that's a basic insight that we need to claim. In these cases, what we do first, we streamline. We have a gender policy domestically, gender equality policy domestically, but also in our foreign policy. And that means that we bring up women's and girls' rights, because these are gender equality is still the human rights that we haven't solved, so to speak. So we need to do that. What can we do? We can, for example, provide resources so that we can investigate in conflict-affected countries, also from a gender equality perspective. So we can, through the United Nations, provide resources, expertise to do such investigations, and those are important. Other example is that we have in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we have a special police team that is specialized in investigating sexual and gender-based violence. So I think resources, expertise, and also make sure that we always push for women's participation, the inclusion of women in be it political processes, a new constitution, or be it negotiating peace or building peace, building a society after a conflict. So make sure that we have the gender equality perspective in everything we do.
Thank you. Dima, I want to go back to you. I want to hear you specifically about Syrian women. What are you hoping to see come out of the Constitutional Committee, but also more broadly from the international community for Syrian women?
So basically, the Syrian conflict, like any other conflict, is at its core, there's a political issue at its heart. So that requires a political solution. And for us to be able to address all the adverse effects on everyone, and especially on women and girls, we need a comprehensive political solution, which also means it has to be inclusive. There has to be adequate representation of women at the negotiations table that leads to the political solution. And this also, this is on our part. That's what we need to work on. And of course, adequate is a vague term so that we don't want anybody to exploit it and say, oh, this is adequate or this isn't. We've actually established a minimum of 30% participation, which we haven't yet reached in the political process, but this is what we need to have a minimum of women to be able to address the issues relating to women and girls, whether we're talking about the Constitution, which is an expression of, it's not a legal document, it's actually an expression of political will, the political will of the people. But also from the international community, some of the things that we need to see, because there are a lot of programs, a lot of policies that are directed towards Syria, and if we're talking about women in conflict, to address the root problems and not just the symptoms. Because in the long run, if we address the symptoms, which is important, but also the root problems, unless we address those, then what we're going to see when we have political transition, either those stay the same for certain issues, and usually women's issues, those stay the same unless we actually target them, or they get reproduced in a different form under the new system, but really the underlying causes stay there. So that's what we actually have to work on together. And this means involvement of women from the ground, Syrian women, in all parts of the processes.
Thank you. I'm going to turn now to Louise Mukwege and switch language as well. Merci d'être avec nous, Madame Mukwege. Donc, au sein de l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie, donc en tant que secrétaire générale, comment travaillez-vous pour aider à avancer la situation des femmes dans les pays membres de l'Organisation de l'OIF?
So the organization I represent, it gathers 88 governments and states everywhere in the world. And for the OIF, we are working on two main pillars. First, education of girls, and second, the women empowerment. I believe that if you educate women and also if you have this independence, then financial independence, well, this would be very important. And of course, we can make the difference. And we actually created a fund that was implemented very early on in the pandemic to support the other initiatives of the different governments. And this fund was created to support women who lost any means of survival. They lost their jobs, and we're working in 20 countries supporting programs. And also we created different initiatives in Lebanon and in Haiti. And the purpose is to really have a minimum, of course, to have what you need here to take care of your children. And, you know, I think this is universal. Women take care not just of themselves, but of their whole families. And it was, of course, a very difficult year, and I was lucky enough to be able to travel and go to several countries. I went to Togo, to Lebanon, and also in Rwanda, my country of origin. And I can really see that this is just the tip of the iceberg, as we are also working on a women entrepreneurship, developing small projects to help women being financially, economically independent. We also have different projects on the digital economy and on education. I'm very in favor of a portal we created, gathering free educational resources. The objective is really to wear awareness here on this necessity to really educate here women as much as men. And we actually launched this site in Senegal last year, and it's been a big success. And it's a platform where we can fight against stereotypes. And it's also a website where you can share your experience in education, raising awareness on the gender equality. And I think we've heard that at several times. And it's a pleasure here to hear all the speakers. The idea that the women are victims. The women are victimized. Very often, women are also very strong and they can always bounce back. And we heard these women in Afghanistan. I think this is very clear in what we do here in the different context. We are just adding our small contribution to women that are ready to do so much already and that have to face a very challenging world. Women need their rights, and women also have this capacity to transform society, and it's in our interest as members of society to take that into account and realize how important that is. And I also believe, in my opinion, we should be able to measure here the outputs and the outcomes of our projects. We talked about, women in Afghanistan and how we can put pressure, political pressure, on the Taliban to obtain outcomes and results. I think we really need to be able to measure all this. And
Merci, Madame Secrétaire Générale.
In order to achieve your result. Thank you very much.
With Prime Minister Levin, just if you can say a few words about Sweden's priorities for women in Afghanistan in closing.
Of course, inclusion and all the rights, the human rights, to avoid, of course, the sexual violence, the violence in general. So it's about the basic human rights. You should adhere to men and women. It would be absolutely natural. So our aim is of course also to, through the European Union and the United Nations, we need to make very clear to the Taliban that this is a prerequisite for us helping. And we do not want to help the Taliban, but we do want to help the Afghan women. And we promised the Afghan women that we will not leave them. We will not forget. We will stay there. We'll fight for their rights and do whatever we can to make sure that that happens.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to wrap up this part of the session. Merci beaucoup, Madame Secrétaire Générale, de vous être rejoint à nous.
Thank you very much,
Dima,
Mrs.
and I want to
General
thank you also
Secretary.
for your important reminder that although the situation in Afghanistan is very, on top of the agenda, there are also other crises that are important for people to talk about. And thank you, Prime Minister. We are now going to watch a video by Nobel Peace Prize laureate Denis Mukwege.
Les violences à l'égard des femmes sont une véritable pandémie et constituent l'une des violations des droits humains le plus répandu et le plus ancien dans de nombreuses sociétés. Outre les dommages souvent irréversibles qu'elles entraînent pour les victimes, ces violences représentent un obstacle à la participation pleine et effective des femmes dans la résolution des grands défis auxquels l'humanité doit faire face, notamment l'instauration de la paix dans les pays qui aspirent à sortir des conflits et la réalisation des objectifs de développement durable à travers le monde. Il faut donc non seulement combattre le patriarcalisme et éliminer ces violences, mais aussi et surtout les prévenir dans l'intérêt de tous. Telle est la raison pour laquelle je suis engagé dans l'éducation à la masculinité positive et lutter contre l'impunité, car nous sommes conscients que les violences faites aux femmes liées au conflit sont l'expression patente des violences et des discriminations latentes dont les femmes sont victimes en période de paix. Mesdames et messieurs, depuis la nuit des temps, les violences sexuelles ont été tolérées, voire acceptées comme une conséquence collatérale inévitable de la guerre. Depuis l'adoption des résolutions 1325 et 1820 du Conseil de sécurité, le lien entre les violences sexuelles et la paix et la sécurité internationale est enfin clairement établi et les viols et les autres crimes sexistes ont été à juste titre codifiés dans les statuts de Rome comme crimes de guerre, crimes contre l'humanité, voire même comme actes constitutifs des crimes de génocide. Néanmoins, ces avancées ne doivent pas occulter le fait que la tragédie de la violence sexuelle continue de prévaloir dans tous les contextes de conflit, que les réponses tant en matière de prévention que de prise en charge des victimes restent sous-financées et que le climat d'impunité pour les crimes sexuels prévaut toujours largement, comme en République démocratique du Congo. En outre, même si le Conseil de sécurité a souvent reconnu que les violences sexuelles sont utilisées comme une arme de guerre, ni les conventions de Genève, ni les statuts de Rome ne reconnaissent explicitement que ces violences constituent fréquemment une véritable stratégie de terreur, une méthode de guerre à l'instar du recours à la famine ou au pillage, qui sont reconnus dans le droit international humanitaire et dans le droit international pénal comme des méthodes de guerre proscrites et punissables. Il est très important de noter cet aspect qui discrimine en fait les crimes sexistes. Mesdames et messieurs, les survivantes de violences sexuelles n'ont pas besoin de notre indignation, ni d'entendre des engagements réitérés à maintes reprises, mais non suivis des résultats concrets. Il faut passer à l'action tout de suite. Il faut dresser une ligne rouge contre l'utilisation des violences sexuelles qui constituent une honte pour notre humanité. Ainsi, nous plaidons pour que les carences du cadre normatif international soient en fait comblées par une réforme des instruments juridiques en vigueur ou l'adoption d'une nouvelle convention internationale pour l'élimination des violences sexuelles utilisées comme méthode de guerre qui aura non seulement un effet préventif et dissuasif, mais définira également des obligations légales claires qui responsabiliseront davantage les individus et les États qui commettent ou tolèrent les violences sexuelles commises à grande échelle dans les situations de conflits armés et d'instabilité. Je remercie d'avance les Nations Unies et l'Union européenne ainsi que leurs États membres pour les actions que vous entreprendrez en vue de construire un monde plus digne où les femmes et les jeunes filles vivront à l'abri de la peur et de la violence en temps de paix comme en période de conflit. Je vous remercie.
Live from New York City, you are watching Women in Conflicts. Joining me now in studio, Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
And Norway's Prime Minister Erna Solberg. Sorry about that. Thank you so much for being with us.
Nice to be here.
So I want to start with Prime Minister Solberg. So we've watched a video provided by Denis Mukwege is making important points about international law and how to implement agreements that are existing to protect women in conflicts. So what are ways that these resolutions can be better implemented in order to prevent impunity when it comes to women in conflict?
Well, one of the things we have to do is to investigate it, to make sure that we have solid proof, that we are collecting, not collecting the crimes against humanity, but also collecting the crimes against women when there is a conflict, after a conflict, that we are, in fact, documenting it so that it can be taken to court, that it can be shown, and that there are no impunity. That's why it's so important that we are not just investigating when you have a biological or chemical attack somewhere, but also in the aftermath or during a conflict to make sure that the stories are told, the witnesses are heard, that you are collecting this because it's important for what will happen in a criminal court afterwards.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now I'm going to turn to Chancellor Kurz. Chancellor, you just held a roundtable on Afghanistan, I think today, with a focus on women. What stood out for you? How are you going to move forward of this roundtable?
Well, it was interesting to listen to the responsibles of international organizations who are active on the ground in Afghanistan, and unfortunately, the picture they painted was always the same, and it was very negative. I would say the situation there is terrible, especially for women, especially for girls. So child marriage is very common. We have definitely a high number of gender-based violence, and millions of women are not allowed to work, and a lot of girls are not allowed to go to school. So I would say the situation is terrible at the moment. Unfortunately, nobody at the table thought that there is an easy answer, but I think we all agreed that it is necessary to make crystal clear to everybody worldwide that women's rights are not negotiable for us. I think it's also important to support international organizations like UN Women, which are active there and in other countries and parts of the world as well. And I think coming to the Taliban, it is important to put a lot of pressure on them, to put maximum pressure on them, that women get access to all parts of the society, to all parts of daily life, to schools, to work, to universities. I think this is the only thing that we can do.
I want to turn back to Prime Minister Solberg. Norway is also on the Security Council right now. What do you see are the next steps for Afghanistan on the Security Council, and also when it comes to women in Afghanistan?
Well, first of all, we are happy that we had a unanimous agreement and resolution on Afghanistan. I think that's a great starting point, because so many conflicts have we've not been able to find common ground in the Security Council. If you look at Syria, for example, that means that it stops. But I think the focus now is, of course, to say we are not listening to what Taliban is saying, we are looking at what they are doing. And we have to follow that on human rights, on women's rights, on the inclusiveness of a government, and make sure that they are upholding basic human rights in Afghanistan. They are in severe need of both humanitarian aid for the people, but also for reconstructional help to build an Afghanistan for the future. And of course, that's a big bargaining chip also for the international community, to say that we will not donate money to a country. We will help them on the humanitarian side, but not donate money to a country or do development aid with a country that are, in fact, severely breaking international law and human rights. And I think we have to work on that basis. And we have to work in the Security Council also to, put targets towards the Taliban to targets and timelines are often very important in shaping progress, also on women's issues, so that there is a date that you should fulfill things by.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Going back to Chancellor Kurz, can you tell me what else is Austria doing internationally to protect women's rights globally?
Well, I think what we do, as many other countries as well, is to try to support international organizations which are doing a good job. So I would like to mention UN Women and others, which I think are doing a great job in Afghanistan and other parts of the world. Second thing is, as a member of the European Union, of course, there's a lot of support for development cooperation and other programs where gender equality is an important guideline. And third point I would like to mention is that we try also in our bilateral cooperation with countries, in our bilateral development cooperation, to more and more focus on gender projects, so to more and more focus on projects where we especially support women or especially support young girls in their education or when they want to start a business or something else.
Thank you so much, Chancellor Kurz, for taking the time today, and thank you, Prime Minister Solberg. We are now going to watch a video that was sent from Belgium by Prime Minister Alexander De Croo.
Dear friends, more than 20 years since the adoption of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, it is sobering that there is still this urgent need to come together and discuss the situation of women and girls in conflicts. Gender violence is one of the worst pandemics in history. Murders, rapes, beatings, threats, the damage is immense. Thousands of lives lost every year. Devastation, disability, depression, unwanted pregnancies, long-term illness, and stigma. It is important that we continue to speak out and act. Conflict-related sexual violence is a war crime, and perpetrators must be held accountable. But it is as important to carefully listen to survivors, who are not a homogeneous group. They all have their own unique story that is important to learn from, to better prevent violations and recognize early warning signs. Today, I would like to draw, once again, particular attention to women's participation in decision-making, and more specifically, their equal participation in peace processes. We all committed to world peace and security agenda, and yet progress is slow, uneven, and insufficient. To make peace last for an entire population, peace processes are to be inclusive. When women make up half of society, we know what their part in peace processes must be. Concrete action can be taken at all levels, in international negotiations, but also bottom-up, starting from the local level. So let's step up these efforts for women's empowerment at the heart of prevention. Measures to increase support for women's organizations and for human rights defenders. All key elements on which Belgium will continue to work with the Belgian National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. I thank you.
Back in New York City and also back with President Charles Michel. Thank you for being with us again. I'm going to introduce you now to Pramila Patton. She is the Executive Director AI of UN Women. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Mrs. Patton, UN Women has a central role when it comes to Afghanistan. Can you tell me what's keeping you up at night right now when you're thinking about the situation in the country?
Well, I'm literally missing out on many nights of sleep. Since I took office as the acting ED of UN Women, I have been working tirelessly on Afghanistan, starting with the emergency evacuation of our national and international staff, but also women's human rights defenders, brave women who have been close partners of UN Women over the years and who were not simply at risk. They were in imminent danger of severe retaliation, and many of them were on hit lists. We have been able, with the support of many states, to evacuate some of them, but a significant number remain behind, and that's my serious concern. I also, I'm very concerned when I reach out to Afghan women back in Kabul, and they share with me their dark and uncertain future under the Taliban rule. One of them told me that she has the impression that she's living in a dark hole of hopelessness. The crescendo of violations of women's and girls' rights, from their exclusion from participation in public and political life to violence against women, we are receiving reports on a daily basis. Today, the Taliban have done some more appointments of deputy ministers, and we see that women are not part of that government. And the skepticism that the women, that the Afghan women were expressing when the Taliban spokesperson were trying to give a different narrative, they have been proven right today. UN Women has taken a strategic decision to stay and deliver, and to support a decision to support the Afghan women and girls. We have negotiated that the UN will stay, but what we will be able to deliver, what will be our capacity and ability, is no one knows. And that's a worrying factor. That will require very serious engagement with the Taliban, which we are doing through UNAMA and our UN partners. We are in the realm of the unknown, depending on how the security and political situation evolves. So this is worrisome for me. And today I also read that the mullahs have indicated that if the international community does not recognize their government, that they will not negotiate on human rights, starting with women's rights. So they have put that condition on the table at a time when we are discussing with the international community what leverage we have and how do we engage with them in a constructive way. They have been the ones to put conditionality on the table. So from the perspective of the rights of women and girls, it is worrisome. I also think that we are speaking very much about right to education or right to participation in public and political life, but it is critical that the international community ensures that through its engagement with the Taliban, that they cover the whole spectrum of women's human rights, including access to healthcare, access to employment. Right now, our female national staff are not even able to work. So that is the reality on the ground. So it's not only the right to education, it's not only the right to participation in public life, but we have to ensure that the red line is full respect for women's human rights in line with their international obligations under the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which Afghanistan has ratified without reservations, but also their own constitutional provisions.
So we're recording this while speakers are talking at the General Assembly right now. What would you like to hear from them when it comes to women's rights globally? And if you could say it, I know it's not easy, but in a few sentences to conclude.
Well, we have seen pushback over the past years with a rise in right-wing conservative movements. But at the same time, we are getting support. I would, as world leaders are gathering here at the 76th session of UNGA and discussing greener, more resilient, and gender equal societies, I would urge them to bounce back on the Generation Equality Forum and its global acceleration plan and the 1,000 bold commitments taken for a new generation of gender equality, and to use this opportunity to re-energize and take these commitments. It is the time to translate, to move from commitments to solutions and compliance.
Thank you, Mrs. Patton. Just to conclude, President Michel, It's been a long discussion, and we've heard from so many people coming up with so many solutions. What are you going to take back to Brussels with you and try to implement?
D'abord, je veux remercier toutes celles et ceux qui se sont exprimés et la volonté que nous avions en organisant cette plateforme en réunion physique et virtuelle en même temps, c'est précisément de dire notre refus de baisser les yeux et notre engagement à considérer que la question de l'égalité entre les femmes et les hommes, l'égalité de genre, la question de la violence contre les femmes dans les conflits armés, c'est pas un sujet accessoire, c'est pas un sujet secondaire, c'est pas un sujet marginal, c'est un sujet central pour notre société. Et ce que nous souhaitons, c'est qu'au départ, des messages qui ont été adressés avec parfois de l'émotion, avec parfois beaucoup de visions très concrètes, on puisse vraiment dessiner des plans d'action concrets, opérationnels. Et j'ai envie, après avoir écouté tout le monde, de vraiment lancer cet appel pour que l'on puisse mobiliser Nations Unies, Union européenne, toutes les organisations internationales, les gouvernements et les sociétés civiles pour renforcer les coalitions internationales avec des plans d'action, mobiliser des ressources, prendre en compte les racines profondes, ça a été dit notamment par Louise, les femmes ont une force transformatrice qu'il faut mobiliser, l'autonomisation, l'éducation des filles, et être vraiment déterminée. Moi, j'ai aussi envie d'ouvrir les bras pour dire prenons le rendez-vous et considérons de manière systématique en mars générale qu'on puisse...
Women who came or who sent videos to share their stories, because very often for them that also means revisiting a trauma, and that's not an easy thing to do. If you missed part of today's show, you can rewatch it on UNN TV or on social media. Thank you and good night.